From awaytogarden.com and robinhoodradio.com, this is A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach, your weekly invitation to dig in and grow.
What are the forward-looking steps in your fall garden routine? The most important tasks you take now to get your garden tucked in that really focus on success next year. Over at the Part Farm, Part Garden of Lee Reich in the Hudson Valley of New York State, his emphasis is on building soil health and also on stashing his tender potted figs so they're primed for another productive fruiting season in the year to come. More in a moment about Lee's fall tactics, but first this message.
Underwriting support by Color Blends Wholesale Flower Bulbs, supplying landscape professionals and ambitious residential gardeners with new ideas and high-quality flower bulbs for fall planting. Plant tulips, plant daffodils, plant Color Blends this fall. Available at colorblends.com.
Lee Reich has degrees in horticulture, soil science, and chemistry, and is the author of many books, including the just-out one called Growing Figs in Cold Climates. He's a longtime no-till organic gardener, an expert pruner, and a grower of many unusual fruits, and someone I've turned to for advice for my own garden countless times over many years, and I'm so glad he's here again today to help us tuck in smarter. Hi, Lee. How are you?
Hi, Margaret. I'm good.
Yeah, you ready to give me some more advice?
Yeah, anytime.
Good. I'll say before we get started that with the transcript of the show over on awaytogarden.com, we're going to have a giveaway of your new book, and congratulations on Growing Figs in Cold Climates, a complete guide, very useful to people like me with potted figs to tuck away. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome, and I'm really happy with the book.
Yeah. So we did a New York Times story together recently based on how to grow and overwinter figs in pots, one of the techniques you cover in that book. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, I really want to do some fall stuff, because everybody who's got a garden has to do some fall stuff, whether they've got a fig or not.
Right.
So what's your, I'm already starting. We haven't had any frost yet on my side of the river. I'm already into some fall chores, though. What's your most important focus that's really on your must list?
I guess the number one thing I like to do, and this is mostly vegetables, is cleanup. And, certain parts of the garden, not the vegetable garden, but other parts of the garden, I don't like to clean up too thoroughly because there's a lot of beneficial insects and fungi and things like that really like the debris and overwintering sites. And some things look nice also. But the vegetable garden, in order to keep diseases down and pests down, I like to thoroughly clean them up. And the other reason I like to thoroughly clean it up is because then in spring, all I got to do is go out and plant. I don't have to do anything else, pretty much.
Right. And you're a no-till gardener in that vegetable garden, right? And maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for over 30 years, I stopped counting a few years ago, but it's over 30 still.
Uh-huh.
And for over 30 years, over 30 years ago, I stopped tilling, and the main impetus for that was to minimize weeds, because weed seeds are buried in the soil, and they get when you till, they get exposed to light, and then they sprout. So that was the main reason, but also it's a whole different. I think it's better for the plants. It's better for the fungi, it's better for the earthworms. And so I stopped tilling, and then every year, basically, first of all, the vegetable garden is in beds, permanent beds. And every year, what I do is I lay a 1-inch depth of compost, finished compost, on each vegetable bed. And this provides all the fertility all the plants need, and this is very intensively planted. It starts very early in the season, and things are still growing now. And so the whole season long, that provides all the fertility the plants need. It snuffs out any small weeds, and it insulates the soil, and it feeds the soil microorganisms. So it has a lot of benefits besides just keeping weeds down.
Right. So you're top dressing the beds, and you're doing that in fall or spring? I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what you said.
Yeah, I could do it any time, but I like to do it in fall because this way in spring I can just plant, and it seems like there's so many other things to do in spring that anything I can get out of the way. And one thing I've been doing in addition is I plant cover crops. If I have any time before early October, if I plant cover crop that can not overwinter, but can go late into the fall. And what I use is oats. Because oats winter kills, so that meshes with my no-till system because I don't have to till it up in the spring. So what happens is that oats grow and they're lush green into December and through December, and then around the end of January they just winter kill. They flop down dead like a mulch in place, which also looks sort of nice because it's got these tawny stems just lying on the ground. And in the spring I could plant right into them, but what I prefer to do is just sort of rake up, which is very easy because they're not connected to the roots anymore. But the best thing about the cover crops is, like, right now I can look over in my garden. It's just lush green with this. It's like, strips of lawn. Each bed is like a strip of high lawn. And it just looks so nice. It's a very nice green color.
Right, as opposed to empty beds. And I love that expression for cover crops, green manure. I always loved that expression. So it's green fertility. Yeah. So you talked about cleanup and being very, good garden hygiene in the fall, really cleaning up the vegetable bed. So are there certain crops you really target very fastidiously for that, or it's wholesale because, and then what do you do with the debris? Like if you had, like we had a lot of rain this year, some people had a lot of fungal diseases in tomatoes and so forth. Or do you compost all the debris no matter what? What's the rule on that?
Well, first of all, I'd say the one crop that I'm most fastidious with is tomatoes.
Yeah.
Just because there's certain leaf spot diseases, there's specifically 3 leaf spot diseases, and 2 of them overwinter in the ground. So I clean up every leaf I can find on the ground, every tomato, and then between that and then covering it with the compost that keeps a lot of the spores in the soil, any that might be left. And then all debris, whether it's from the vegetable garden or my fruit plantings, everything goes into my compost pile. I know that if you read some places or most places, they say, well, if you have anything that's diseased, don't put it in your compost pile. Well, yes. I contend that if you looked at any part of any plant closely enough, there'd be something inimicable in that, and would have some pest or disease lurking there, and you'd put nothing in the compost. So I put everything in my compost. I've done this for decades, and I've never had a problem as a result.
Right. So, and is your compost kind of cooking along fast and hot, or is it passive? Or it's in bins, I think, right?
I have to admit that my compost do get quite hot. Like typically, I just built one, and my compost is like 145 degrees. But the thing is, a compost doesn't have to be hot to kill all these organisms. It takes some combination of time and temperature. If you don't get a hot compost and you leave it long enough, it'll also kill the microorganisms, the pathogens. And if you have a high temperature, you can do it more quickly. So one way or another, they'll mostly be wiped out, and I would not worry about them. And I think just for the environmental benefit of, I can't see putting these diseased plant parts in a plastic bag and putting them in a landfill. I have this thing about landfills. I'm not a big fan.
Right. And as you've proven, again, you say over decades, it works. I mean, for you, it's working, and it's not increasing your disease load, the next year or anything like that. Yeah. But leaving it lying in the beds would be a bad thing. That's definitely, the good garden hygiene is really essential, I think, and especially in fall. I mean, even with pests, with insect pests, I mean, nothing like leaving your brassicas and your all your cucurbits, the squashes up, and those pests that just can't wait to find a nice cozy place near their favorite plants to overwinter or whatever. It's not good, So you don't want to leave that debris, or when they awaken in the spring, to have the food source right there, some old shriveled whatever right there. It's just bad business, I think, to leave a mess in the fall.
The other thing is, the other reason I have to say why I do this is because it looks nicer. Also, there's I like a certain messiness in the garden, but I also like a certain neatness, and it's just nice to look over the garden and see everything in order.
It seems like a sense of closure in a way to the season. Like, do you know what I mean? It has a sense of finishing and completing and leaving it in good condition and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of my favorite quotes is from a book is from the late 1800s. I don't know if you're familiar with Charles Dudley Warner, My Summer in a Garden.
No.
Oh, it's a great book. It's very well written, and it's sort of takes a little swipe at politics at the time. He was a friend of Mark Twain. Anyway, if I just found this quote quickly. He wrote that the closing scenes are not necessarily funereal. A garden should got ready in winter. A garden should be got ready for winter as well as for summer. When one goes into winter quarters, he wants everything neat and trim.
Huh.
And I sort of like the whole thing about not being funereal and melancholy in the fall. Have everything sort of in order, or at least part of the garden. I mean, I have to say my perennial flower garden is very much not in order.
Oh, so fruit is a big thing for you, and you've the first time I met you was when I think I wrote a story about one of your earlier books, Uncommon Fruits Worthy of Attention, which then I think got republished as under another title later on and so forth. But fruit, you kind of woke us all up, a lot of gardeners all over the place, up to the idea that we could grow more than, a strawberry or an apple or whatever. And figs are one of the things that, I associate with you because you've helped me over the years to figure out how to make mine work. And I just have one old one in a big pot and so forth. So I thought maybe we'd talk about that a little bit for people. We just did a story about it, as I said, in the New York Times in the garden column. And it was kind of fun because you, in this new book, you do give multiple approaches that people can use. Some take a lot more work. The one that we talked about in the Time story was growing them in a pot, because that's kind of the easiest in a way. But I learned one thing I really learned talking to you this time was, and from reading the book, is don't put tender plants like shrubs like this or trees in the case of the fig, don't put them in storage too soon in the fall, right? Like it's not time at all. You don't put yours away till like mid-December or something, even though you're in a cold zone, right?
Yeah, people don't realize that. First of all, figs are not tropical fruits. They're subtropical fruits. They can take down to 20 degrees or possibly even lower. In a pot, maybe not that cold because the roots would be exposed to more cold weather. But so I'd leave mine out as long as possible. And typically around here, and this is Zone 5 in the Hudson Valley, till late December. I mean, you want them to experience that cold because that really helps toughen them up for winter. And you want them to get as fully dormant as possible. You want them to lose their leaves, go to sleep, so to speak, and then they're ready to take winter and stay asleep, hopefully, long enough.
Right. And you can put them in, you can do a number of things with a potted fig. I mean, I just drag mine on a hand cart into the unheated barn, but it is insulated and it's protected from wind and ice and so forth. And they just kind of sleep in there, and it gets pretty damn cold in there. But as you taught me when we talked recently, it's a combination of protection and pruning that's the success to us northern gardeners trying to get a fig to be productive. It's not just keeping it not getting down to zero or whatever in the winter, and it's not just pruning, it's those two things, yes?
Right, because pruning, fig is such a, maybe this is what attracted, it couldn't be because I didn't know anything about figs when I started growing them, but I was attracted to growing them. But now, one thing that really fascinates me with figs is how unique it is. I mean, and this is crucial for pruning, is that figs bear fruit on both, two different possible ways. One is on new growing shoots, which is not common for fruits that we grow around here. Apple bears on branches a few years old, and peaches on at least 1 year old, but a fig will bear on a new growing shoot. The shoot starts growing this season, and it bears. And will also, in some varieties, bear on 1 year old wood. most of the varieties that people grow in the north bear at least one of their, some figs bear on two crops, a new and old year, new and 1 year old. But most of the figs that people grow in northern climates bear on new growing shoots at the very least. And the easiest way to manage them, if you grow them in pots, is to cut the plant back. And this also makes it easier to move the pot indoors and outdoors wherever you're protecting it. But the one thing that people don't realize sometimes is you can't cut it back as much as you want, because the more it's cut back, the longer it takes before it starts bearing. And if it takes too long to start bearing, then they won't ripen in the season. So you have to leave, by my estimate, a couple of feet of old growth. And the very easiest way to grow a fig tree in a pot and prune it correctly is to train it to a single stem, have that stem be 2 feet high, and every year, at the end of the season, cut back all growth to that stem, any coming up from ground level everywhere, and just have a single stub, 2 foot high stub. And so it makes it very easy to prune too, and very easy to move around. It just has a different look. Fig tree can also be grown as with a shrubby form. It's not going to have that shrubby look then.
Right.
So, Margaret, are you going to reconfigure your fig now?
I'm so torn because mine is more shrubby. So by being in a pot all these years, a very, very, very large pot, but it's kind of dwarfed, it. And I do take it out every couple of years and root prune it as well. And that's another important thing we can tell people about. But so mine looks kind of like a shrub, a big shrub. And I love the look of it. It's beautiful. And, fig leaves are beautiful. It's very ornamental. So I hate to do it as just a stub and then have the shoots come off it. But I know that would give me more of this current year wood that potentially, because it's coming off older wood, the trunk that's left behind, would potentially have plenty of time to develop and ripen lots of fruit, more than I'm getting now. And so I'm tempted to almost get a second one and have it be my producer. You know what I mean?
But you could actually have sort of almost the best of both worlds by on your shrubby one, any like spindly growth, especially growing out sideways, you just cut that back because that's not going to do anything next year. And then any really robust growth, save that at least 2 feet long, and don't save too many, or there won't be enough energy to really pump a lot of fruit out from that.
Right.
And then sort of the moderate growth, you can leave some and remove some.
And so pruning can happen, and this was another thing that you reminded me of in our recent discussions. It can happen anytime from after leaf drop, before storage, to when it first comes out before, in late winter, early spring, right? I mean, we have a choice of when we do it.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage of doing it now, not now, but before you put it into storage is it's easier to move around. I mean, I know because when I used to take mine down to the basement, it's a very narrow stairway, so I couldn't let the stems grow too far wide. So I would cut them back, but I would also tie them together so that they wouldn't spread as much, just to move them around.
Right. And as I just mentioned, the root pruning, so there's this top growth pruning, and we're trying in the northern climates where we may not have enough time, where a lot of the varieties we're going to grow, you're better off going for that main crop, not that crop on the older wood maybe, but cutting back more and having more of these new shoots and going for the main season crop on the new wood. So if we're doing that, the other kind of pruning we need to do is, because the plant's going to exhaust its resources, even in a really big pot, right? The underground resources.
Right.
And
it'll get, the roots will get too cramped, plus there won't be any sufficient nutrients left. And, so you have to refresh the soil every once in a while, which you can do by putting it into a bigger pot, or you can just root prune. You slice off the roots all around the root ball and pack new soil in there.
And do you do that with like a saw, or what is it that you use? Because it's, we're talking woody roots in there, right?
Right. Well, I used to use an old bread knife, which didn't work that well. And then I can't remember, there's a name for this tool, but people usually call it a sawzall.
Mm-hmm.
And sawzall with a metal blade. And
Wow.
It takes 2 seconds. You just
Wow.
it's very
That's
very
serious
untraditional.
Yeah.
But that works well. One thing you said that I just want to mention also. You mentioned that the way I talked about pruning, you grow a main in northern climates to go for the main crop. If you are protecting the plant, moving it to shelter over the winter, and you have one that bears the first crop, which is the crop on 1-year-old wood,
Yes.
which is called the Reich-A crop, you actually could get an earlier crop at that, much earlier than you do the main crop. So if you happen to have that variety and you save sufficient amount of 1-year-old wood, you could get a more reliable early crop, but then you have to save a lot more wood. And then you have to prune it in a way that saves some of that wood, but also stimulate growth for next season's new wood.
Right. So that's a little more sophisticated, strategic.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to locate a variety. Not that it's that rare, but a lot of times people don't know what variety they're really growing, or people make up names for varieties. So you have to get a variety that specifically does bear a good Reich-A crop.
Yeah.
First crop.
So I have a completely stray question, not about figs and not exactly about a surprise question, but that it makes me think of it because a reader just asked it of me the other day. He, as I had read something about peat moss, not wanting to use peat moss, and I think it was in an English paper, newspaper. Garden column, and you make your own potting medium. So here we are, we're going to repot this fig and root prune it and make room for some new medium. So in the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to ask you, I know peat is one of the things that you include in your own potting mix that you make. It's not the primary ingredient, but you have other ingredients. If we shouldn't be using peat, are there any other things that people can use? Because you have a soil science degree and you mix your own soils and so forth. Any suggestions about that at all?
Yeah, well, it's sort of funny because when I first got into start studying soils and started gardening, I looked up there's so many recipes for potting mixes made with all sorts of things. And, there's certain things that you need a potting mix for. It has to provide, a place for the roots to hold up the plants, has to provide nutrients, has to provide air. Ideally, it also provides organic matter to hold moisture. And there's a lot of ways you can achieve that. So I came up with my mix, which happens, I based it on some other mixes I had read about, and it works really well. And so the simplest thing, instead of peat, coir, C-O-I-R, which is a byproduct of the coconut industry. So this is a sustainable, so they say, product. So I have tried that. And I have to say, and this is not, heavy scientific experiment, just my what's it called? My anecdotal. Oh no, it's just me. But I haven't had good success with coir, so I really don't use it anymore. But I have, quickly, if I just had to put together a mix and I didn't want to go through, getting my dipping into my peat container, I can use compost, because compost is organic matter, which is what peat supplies. So I've made, and you sort of get a feel for it if you do it a lot, of even in your hands of, okay, this is going to have a good balance of air and moisture holding. So I've made mixes out of just compost and perlite, which probably also is not sustainable. You can make a mix out of compost and probably sand, or compost and soil. I know that a local grower here, for all his seedlings, he uses just pure compost. I don't know how that works. I don't think it would work for a long term, because compost, being, all organic matter, over time disappears. So it would just settle to nothing. So you can use all sorts of, basically the idea is you have some sort of organic matter, which could be compost, peat, leaf mold is another thing. Right. And you want some mineral product, which I use perlite, but you could also use calcined montmorillonite clay, which is also known as kitty litter, or one type of kitty litter. You could use coarse sand, and I like to. I know potting mixes that you buy don't have real soil in them, but I think there's a certain benefit to having real soil.
A little
in a
bit,
potting
yeah.
mix.
Interesting.
So I use 1/4 soil, but I wouldn't use more than 1/4 soil. So there's a lot of ways to make a mix that works.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lee Reich, and congratulations again on growing figs in fall climates. We're going to have a giveaway with the transcript, and I hope I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Underwriting support by Color Blends Wholesale Flower Bulbs, supplying landscape professionals and ambitious residential gardeners with new ideas and high-quality flower bulbs for fall planting. Plant tulips, plant daffodils, plant Color Blends this fall. Available at colorblends.com.
And thanks to all of you for listening, too. Now, don't miss an episode. You can subscribe free to the podcast version of the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify. And you can find me anytime at awaytogarden.com. or on Facebook and on Instagram as @awaytogarden. And happy fall cleanup and gardening meantime.
A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach is a joint production of awaytogarden.com and the smallest NPR station in the nation, Robin Hood Radio.